So you hear the words government shutdown on the news all the time, right? And it can sound like this far-off political fight in Washington. But the thing is, the effects are real. They're immediate and they're widespread. So today, we're going to break down exactly what a shutdown really means. Not for the politicians, but for the millions of actual people who keep this country running. All right, let's just start with a number. 670,000. In a shutdown, that's the minimum number of federal employees who would be furloughed. What's that mean? It means they're sent home, can't work.
And then there's this number, 730,000. Now, these are the federal employees who are told they're essential. So they have to keep working, but here's the kicker, they have to do it without getting paid. The official term for this whole mess, it's called a shutdown furlough. And it all happens for one reason. Congress can't agree on a budget to keep the government running, so the funding just stops. The money literally runs out, and a whole lot of government services just grind to a halt.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the big picture. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty rules of who works and who doesn't. After that, we'll talk about the paycheck problem, which is huge. And finally, we'll see how this whole thing creates a massive ripple effect across the entire country. All right, Section 1, the big picture. We're talking about more than 1 million people whose lives get turned upside down by a shutdown. They're either sent home or, forced to work for what's basically an IOU. So how does this even happen? Well, to get it, you've got to understand the law that makes it all but inevitable.
So that key word here is furlough. Now, it's important to know this isn't a layoff. It's a temporary, no work, no pay situation. And it's a direct result of something called a lapse in appropriations. But what actually forces that lapse to become a full-blown shutdown? Well, the answer is a law that's been on the books for over 100 years. Okay, this is the big one, the Anti-Deficiency Act. Think of it as the legal backbone for this entire process. It's a super important law that basically says federal agencies cannot spend money they don't have. They can't even promise to spend money that Congress hasn't officially approved. So when those funding bills get stuck, the spending has to stop. Period. It's the law. And that's what forces all those so-called non-critical activities to just stop.
Right. So that leads to a pretty big question, doesn't it? If parts of the government are shutting down, who makes the call on who has to work and who gets sent home? Well, it all comes down to two key groups. First, you've got your accepted employees. Think about people like air traffic controllers or federal law enforcement. Their jobs are seen as absolutely critical to protecting human life and property, so they have to keep working, even though they're not getting paid. Then you have exempt employees. Now, they also keep working, but they do get paid. Why? Because their funding comes from a totally different source, one that isn't caught up in this yearly budget battle. And listen, this isn't just some random decision agencies make up on the fly. This guidance is official. It comes straight from the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. You'll hear it called the OPM. They're basically the HR department for the entire federal government, and they're the ones who set the rules to make sure everyone is following the same playbook for these really tough calls. So what about everyone else? Well, if you're not accepted and you're not exempt, you land in the biggest group of all. You're furloughed. These are the folks who are sent home, no work, no pay, until Congress finally gets its act together and restores the funding. A question that always comes up is, well, couldn't these people just volunteer to do their jobs? I mean, if they're dedicated? And the answer is a simple, hard no. Remember that law we just talked about, the Anti-Deficiency Act? It specifically says that agencies are not allowed to accept volunteer work from their employees. Because if they did, that would create a financial obligation, basically an IOU, that the government legally can't make during a shutdown. And that brings us right to the part that hits home the hardest for people, the paycheck problem. This is where a political fight in D.C. stops being theoretical and starts affecting real families at their kitchen tables all across the country.
Yeah, this isn't just an idea, it's a reality with a schedule. Take a look at this potential timeline. You can see how paychecks would just stop on specific dates for different groups of people, creating this rolling financial crisis. And the big one, the really scary one, November 14th. That's the day that, for the first time in American history, every single branch of the U.S. military could miss a paycheck, all at the same time.
The scale here is just staggering. If a shutdown were to drag on through December 1st, the total amount of money withheld from just the civilian employees, we're talking about an estimated $21 billion, with a B. So, naturally, this leads to the most important question of all for these families. Do they ever get that money back? Is it just gone? I mean, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, this is everything. The good news is, there is an answer. And the answer is yes, they do get paid. Eventually. There's a law that was passed in 2019 called the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act, and it guarantees that all those furloughed and accepted employees will get retroactive pay. So as soon as the shutdown is over, the government is legally required to cut those checks for all the time they missed or worked without pay, and they have to do it as fast as possible. But look, even with that guarantee of back pay, you can imagine the stress and the real hardship that uncertainty causes. This quote here from the Bipartisan Policy Center really puts it into perspective. The idea that for the first time ever, our military members might miss a paycheck, it just shows you how serious and unprecedented this kind of situation can be. Okay, so the impact doesn't just stop with the federal employees and their families. It creates this huge ripple effect that spreads way beyond Washington, D.C. and touches communities all over the country. So is this just a Washington, D.C. problem? That's what a lot of people think, but honestly, that couldn't be further from the truth. The vast majority of federal employees do not live and work in the D.C. area. I mean, the federal workforce is literally everywhere. Take the USDA's Farm Service Agency. They have 2,000 offices helping farmers in counties all over the nation. 2/3 of their staff gets furloughed. Or OSHA, which keeps workplaces safe. They've got offices all over, and nearly 3/4 of their people are sent home. And then, of course, you have 1.1 million active duty service members at over 300 bases scattered across the entire U.S. So when you add all of that up, the daily hit in just missed pay comes out to an estimated, and this is a staggering number, $400 million per day. That's a huge chunk of money that's just being vacuumed out of local economies every single day the government is shut down. And you have to remember, military bases are often the economic engines for their local towns. When things are running normally, that money flows right into local restaurants, car dealerships, and small businesses. But a shutdown stalls that engine. When service members aren't getting paid, they can't spend money. So that lost income for them becomes lost revenue for the whole community that relies on them. The impact is just enormous. I mean, one study found that military bases pump $6.5 billion into New Jersey's economy alone. Imagine turning that tap off. So, let's end with this thought. We know the pay is eventually restored, right? But what about the things that aren't so easy to fix? What's the hidden cost of all this economic uncertainty for millions of families? And what does it do to the health of the communities that depend on them? That is the real question that hangs in the air long after the lights in Washington are turned back on.